face and start kicking ass, just like it said at the beginning of the program.
Man of the hour, tower of tower, too sweet to be sour.
Sending your ass on the jabroni jet to the other side of the territory, brother.
The Alabama Hammer.
Nightmares on the best part of my day.
The goods from the woods.
Hot damn!
Welcome to the Goods from the Woods. My name is Rivers Langley, and I continue to be on the road. This is episode number 6 in our little On the Road series, and next week we'll be back in Los Angeles with Dr. Pat, Sam Harder, and a regular program. But today, I am so excited to have this man on the show. I'm sitting in the back of Smoker's Abbey, which is a cigar store here in East Nashville, puffing on a cigar and welcoming our guest, the star of our Redneck Pompeii episode from last summer. That's episode number 203, and he is back with us today. Our friend, he's a scholar, he's a comedian, he is the king of Nashville, our buddy,
Ben Sawyer.
Dr. Ben. I'm back again.
Although less sweaty than the picture that you took of me from that podcast that made its way around.
So,
You have air conditioning in your room. Remember? And you were like, let's take a picture. And I was like, okay. And people were like, wow, was the sun in weird places? Were there multiple suns that day? And I was like, no, just one sun.
No, we were just seated normally.
Heat? No.
Seated like normal men sweating in an apartment in East Hollywood, you know.
But now we're living the good life because we're at Smoker's Abbey in East Nashville.
Yeah.
I love this place. I've always wanted to record a podcast episode from here.
And now we're doing it.
And now we're doing it for your podcast, but I don't care whose podcast it is because this place is awesome.
Yeah. So this is we're in East Nashville. We're across the street from Dino's. I think I mentioned in the last episode we were going to record at the back of Dino's, and then Dr. Ben was like, "Oh, there's a cigar place across the street," and I was like, "That's perfect because I don't smoke cigars, and I'm gonna." So currently, I'm smoking a Aladino.
Wow.
That's perfect. It's because we were at Dino's, and I went from Alabama to Dino's today. So
Dude, that was
it's fortuitous. This is a fortuitous stogue, Dr. Ben.
It's prophetic.
Yeah. So we walked in here and they were doing a Game of Thrones watch party, and they were on literally the last 2 minutes of the show. So Ben was trying to avoid looking at the screen because he hasn't seen it yet. I've never seen Game of Thrones, so
you also haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, so I also haven't seen it yet. But everybody was this place is it's a cigar store, so I expected some level of smoke. But I mean it's like
it's like on fire in here. So as if there were dragons in here. Mm-hmm. It's only the smoky because they cut off all the air filters so that people could hear the sound better.
Right, yeah, because the air filters were noisy and they were interrupting the adventures of Jon Snow. Is that a reference? Did I do that right?
Who knows, man? Did he live? Did he die? By the time this airs, you'll find out.
Yeah.
Jon Snow died like 8 times in the show, so
and he just keeps coming back.
Dice. Yeah,
that's one of those shows that I think I'd like to try to piecemeal put back together, knowing nothing about the show, and just tell people.
Yeah, just so to your listener. I mean, I feel like everybody watches the show, but you. Are you making a statement, Rivers? Are you trying to tell America something?
Well, no, I'm not saying I'm better. I'm just saying I don't do dragons and wizards and stuff. I'm on record. I've never seen Lord of the Rings, although I can tell you I've read the Wikipedia articles. So I know enough to I could convince the average person that I've read Lord of the Rings and could speak knowingly about J.R.R. Tolkien's experience in World War I and how it affected his view of what it was to be a Briton, what it was to be a global citizen, a way to combine all of the mythical elements and the historical elements of many European cultures and sort of combine them into one mythos and stuff like that. So I could talk as if I've read Lord of the Rings or seen it, but I haven't.
Here's what I love about you is I've heard a lot of people say the books are better than the movies. I've never heard someone say the Wikipedia article
was sufficient.
Yeah.
It was a sufficient replacement for reading and seeing them.
I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying that all things considered.
I'm saying I didn't need to read all of that.
Most sufficient consumption of the narrative.
the Silmarillion was not. Didn't need to go into that much detail about it. It was just the cultural section of the Wikipedia article.
Well then, so Rivers, you were in Alabama this weekend. I was in Atlanta.
Yeah. So what was your task in Atlanta? It was a conference.
It was. I was doing the global and economic history conference, the spring conference at Georgia State University.
Okay.
Shout out to those guys.
Shout out to Album 88, the best damn college radio station in Georgia, which is no longer there. That got taken over by NPR.
Well, I guess you can shout out to it, but no one hears it screams.
Yep.
But
R.I.P.
Georgia State's really cool, man. Like I do like history of capitalism, economic history stuff, and like what that means is that I live between two worlds as a scholar, academically. Like I have been trying to convince people in Soviet history the value of like actually thinking about capitalism and communism as like economic systems that produce values, not just prices but values. And at first I failed to do that, but there's been this, I started grad school in 2007.
Yeah,
and I was told that what I'm interested in was dead. And then I don't know if you remember this or not, or you listeners remember it, but then there was a giant fucking economic crash
that year. Yeah,
and everybody was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And I was like, "Okay." So I tried to do this, and now, and this is the thing, we like to pretend as if it was pure empiricism that drove the interests of the academy. However, it might be egos and path dependency. And so the cool thing was, and sorry for anybody that lost everything during the last economic crisis, but it made people interested in economic systems again.
Yeah.
And so now it's like I showed back up to give a talk at the Soviet History Conference in December in Boston, the Association of Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and gave a talk about a new research project I'm doing with my fingers crossed and prepared to put my hands over my heads as they threw rocks at me. But actually people liked it. And then I went to the economic and financial and business historians this weekend at a conference at Georgia State, and they liked it. And so now I am proceeding on this new project. Would you like to know what it's called?
Yeah, hit me.
The name of the project is Karl Marx versus the Soviet Union.
Sort of like Animal Farm. Like, where did it go wrong when they put Snowball in control?
No, it's not what you think.
Or Napoleon, rather. I guess Snowball got Snowball. Trotsky had to get an ice pick in his head, and then Stalin took over, and they lost the vision.
Nah, that's what Trotsky said. And, we always believe the one that died or disappeared, right? In Cuba, we love Che, and in the Soviet Union, we love Trotsky. It's always the what could have been if this maniac would have taken over instead of the other maniac. Yeah, I'm not to say they're all the same. No, it's actually based upon, it's a study of Russian bonds that were issued by the Russian, like the Tsarist government in 1916.
Okay.
And then the Bolsheviks took over like 2 years later, and they were like, we'll never pay anybody back this money. But, Americans, we were like, but you will, right? And they were like, nope. And and so they were abrogated in January of 1919, right? Like right after they 1918, sorry, right after they took over. January 1918. But Americans were like, nah, you'll pay us back someday, right?
Right.
And so they sold on the American Stock Exchange until 1956.
Wow. Just like loose Russian bonds, basically?
But yeah. So $75 million.
Oh, my God.
So anyway, what I'm doing with my project is, and sorry for anyone that's falling asleep right now.
Oh, no, this is fascinating.
If you veered into an 18-wheeler, I'm sorry for putting you to sleep, but, No, so the project is to try to figure out, like, with the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
Like, for the American side, we know what politicians thought for the most part, right? The archives are more opening up. We're getting more access to knowing these things. So there's that, and we know what labor unions thought. We know about, like, on the ground. But the one thing nobody's ever really asked themselves is, like, what do financiers actually think? Like, not big business people, right?
Right.
And we know what they think. They're like, fucking kill them, right?
Like people in the trenches. Like,
but what do like bond traders, like what do financiers actually think? Because here's actually a thing that the only way you're going to get paid back for this bond is if the U.S. and the Soviet Union get on good enough terms that the Soviets agree to pay it back. And they got no incentive to, I don't know if you guys heard this, but after World War II, like they're a superpower, right? So basically, if you trace the price of these bonds on the markets, you can figure out not what like politicians think, but like what does your average person on Wall Street think about the relationship with the United States and the Soviet Union? Because it's priced.
Right, yeah, because there's an incentive there. Yeah.
So if it goes up to like, at one point at the end of World War II, it's like up to like 22% of face value. It's $1,000 bonds, right? Which is pretty impressive for a bond that has been, basically abrogated for 30 years.
And disavowed by the government that issued it.
Yeah, sorry, repudiated.
Yeah.
But they're not in default, right? I mean, like some people are like, well, they were defaulted. Like, no, default means like, well, we were trying to pay you back, but we can't.
Yeah.
Like repudiated is just like, we'll never pay you back.
Yeah, it's a really official way of saying go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
I ain't paying for shit.
Yeah,
you gotta drag me in front of Judge Judy.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I didn't break your car window.
Yeah. Here's the long story. All right. Speaking of courts. So anyway, Rivers. This is all to bring it back around. They get delisted in '56. There's a lot to it, but here's the best part. Why it's called Karl Marx versus the Soviet Union. the single largest trader in terms of buying and selling these. Even after they get delisted, right? You can find moments where people are really interested in it and the price goes up because the Wall Street Journal will send somebody out on that beat, right? The largest buyer and seller, and today the largest holder, today, right now, right?
Yeah.
Largest holder is a firm in New York City called Karl Marx and Company.
Whoa.
CarlMarks. And they still today are the largest. So in the 1980s, Rivers, they thought that they figured out a way to make the Soviets pay for this because there was, in 1982, there was a...
Wait, who is Karl Marx not is it a fake guy, I guess?
No. Karl Marx was a German immigrant who came to the United States and in 1925 started hustling when the market was going crazy, right?
Yeah.
He had a deal where he got some auxiliary job, right? But then he kind of figured out the market and the way people work, and then he started making money. And so one thing early on, they specialized in distressed bonds and other instruments, right?
Yeah.
So this guy just figured out, if you sit on something long enough and it falls, what'll happen is eventually it'll probably go back up when people go, oh, God, that thing fell out. So he was kind of noticing the things that people forgot about.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, his name was, that was the guy, right?
Right.
So anyway, he started this company. But in 82, there was a law passed called the Foreign Sovereignties Immunity Act, which changed kind of your ability to hold foreign states accountable.
Yeah.
And Karl Marx, now having held this debt for a long time, believed they could sue the Soviet Union now in state courts, right? Uh-huh. And then this is their interpretation. So, not surprisingly, they decided to introduce it into federal court in a district in Alabama.
Oh, good.
I don't know why they would think that Alabama would be more on the side, but long story short, this produces a court case that eventually gets turned down in district court. But the court case is actually called Karl Marx versus the Soviet Union.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, gotcha.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
okay.
That's the twist. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Wake back up now. We'll talk about other things.
No, I love that.
So that's what I was doing this weekend in Atlanta.
Oh, okay. Was putting all that together.
Giving a talk about that.
Yeah. That's
with some other
interesting.
outstanding financial and business historians.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that it's 2007 and all of a sudden there's a renewed interest in all of that. That's kind of when I first was like, oh, everything's bad. Everything's bad and people want ill for you for the most part.
It's not even everything's bad. It's maybe everything is bad. I'm not trying to make that argument, right? That's a different argument. But it's more like a, oh my God, how are we not thinking about the way this stuff works?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, when times are flush, we forget. I guess the incentive to be evil for money. If everybody's doing okay enough not to be pissed about it, then you just kind of let the system do its thing. Which I've heard many a somewhat convincing argument that America is a scam. The entire country is a scam starting in 1776 to make money for white people. And it's that class is going to move further and further away from everybody else, which is what we're seeing now. Hence who we've got in the old White House there is that, and people are going to deal with that trauma one way or the other. And so I think 2007 might have been the beginning of what we're seeing now of just people who are just you know what? Fuck everything. Burn it down. Which is a very Soviet reaction to things.
Well, yeah.
Burn it fuck down.
We really proved them that we wouldn't hang ourselves with the news that was made by a capitalist. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's fascinating, right? Because as everything was going down in 2008, which, by the way, here's an interesting fact. The highest consolidation of wealth in the top 10%, right?
Yeah.
Of national income. There are 2 points on that chart since you can basically chart it from 1910, right? Because the stats.
Yeah.
The two highest points of wealth consolidation in terms of national income are 1929 and 2008.
Yeah. Yep.
You can see it. It's no surprise, right?
Yeah.
But I was reading this great book by John Kenneth Galbraith called The Great Crash because I did a minor field in history of American capitalism. But I started reading it in December of 2008.
Yeah,
right?
and you're like, oh, this seems creepy and familiar.
I was like, I'm reading the script. It was like the Twilight Zone where you're reading the book that you're reading a book and it's happening in front of you.
Right. You haven't seen the Game of Thrones yet, but then you peek your head into a cigar store and you're like, fuck, that guy died. Damn it. Yeah.
Or better yet, you're reading, you're proofreading you're reading a book from 50 years ago, and you're like, and then Jon Snow, and you're like, Jon Snow, and you look up and you're like, how is the story I'm reading from 50 years ago the same story?
Yeah.
That's just coming out.
Right.
And so
is that I've always had a thing. It's like if they say like the people who are the happiest are the people who don't give a shit about any of this and don't read and go back and read their history and stuff, which is why I always love talking to you and talking to anybody who studies history, because I consume a great deal of information about history, and it does it make you more cynical? It makes me incredibly cynical, I find. When you're just reading stuff from 1910 and you're like, it's just the same shit. It's the same shit, except we have iPhones. That's the only thing that's different. We're the same dumb people we've always been.
All right, that's a reasonable way to take. I mean, like, not reasonable, but that's understandable, I would say. Mm-hmm. But like, so do you realize the more you study history, like how much we miss all the time? Yes, right?
Yeah.
But we have inched ourselves along far away, right? And let me just say this. It's what I always say to my students and other friends of mine who are like, hey, it's fucking bullshit, man. It's never gonna... Here's the thing I always say. My father was born in 1945, and the year my father was born, in North Carolina, it was totally legal to segregate, not provide schools for black folks.
Yeah,
and
sure.
all that stuff, right? That's my father. My father was 9 years old whenever Brown versus the Board of Education passed, which allowed black folks to even go to school with white folks.
Sure.
Right? So my father was born. Segregation was the way of the world in the South. When my son was born, we had a black president, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So as cynical as I am about things, I can never ignore that swing. Because you're talking about 3 generations. A guy who was born into a world where black people were legally like second-class citizens. I mean, of course they weren't, but they were, right? And my son's born into a world with a black president. And so it's not a straight line, right? We know we can move forward, move back.
Definitely not a straight line, but there is the argument that like culture is downstream from politics. Like things move along in a way where it becomes advantageous to include more people into your system, not necessarily for good reasons, but for self-interested reasons.
Oh yeah. So if you want to be cynical about this, right, you could point out, which is what we know, which is that the question is like, why does a Southern Democrat from Texas become the one who signs the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, right? 64, 65.
Right.
Seems odd, right? Well, the cynical but true thing you have to understand is that the United States is fighting the Cold War.
Yeah.
And the countries that become independent after World War II, the former colonial countries, are in Africa and Asia. They're not white people.
Yes.
Right? And the U.S. and the Soviet Union are both trying to be like, hey, you guys come be on our team.
Yeah, exactly.
And the U.S. is showing up and they're like, hey, look, Soviets, man, they break people's backs. They don't care. They torment people. They don't care about civil rights. They kill their own people. They put them in camps and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, and look, they don't care about human rights. And plus, who's got the best economy in the world? And it's unarguable, right? And the 1950s,
well,
the Soviet economy is going faster than ours.
Yeah,
but it's nowhere near ours, right?
Yeah. Well, part of that is because every Western country is on their back, by circumstances that were no fault of our own. It's this time that's so vaunted by dipshits like Sean Hannity, who are like, it's the greatest, it's the freest country in the world, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, by happenstance, a bunch of countries that were hostile to each other happened to share a bunch of borders, and they all blew themselves up. So there was one game in town.
Yeah, it's fucking, by conservative standards, the United States in 1945 had 50% of the world's capacity.
And they literally think it's because God was shining on us. I'm like, if anything, this is like, this makes an argument, not even for atheism, but something I like, which is anti-theism. The fact that, like, no, there is a God, and he's constantly fucking with us.
Right.
Which is my belief. I've moved past atheism. I'm like, no. I think it's bad enough that there's no God. There's just the devil, and he's just messing with everybody for funsies.
Well,
which I say half jokingly, but that is a thing that they're always like, that they'll harp on, like, oh, this was, and it's, the Make America Great Again. Like the time that they imagine is great had literally nothing to do with us.
Well, no, like let's not say it had nothing to do with us. It has something to do with us.
Nothing to do with our system, just with our resources.
I would disagree. Because in the decade before we got involved in World War II, we had one of the great Americans that nobody talks about. We had, everybody talks about FDR.
Yeah,
and
sure.
FDR matters, right?
Yeah.
But we had Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins, she's the one who, basically fought for what was considered insane radical reform in the 1930s, which was like stuff like a 40-hour work week and a minimum wage and Social Security. Like, I mean, she's the one who showed up like, she had already fought for all these things for years. She's a member of the Socialist Party.
I was going to say she's born out of Marxism, by the way.
Not so much more, but she was a socialist, right? She was part of and people don't realize that the Socialist Party was huge in the early 20th century, but nobody had like experience with Stalin yet, right? So you got to get
exactly.
that. They were just like, hey, maybe some of these things that we're making should benefit people. But like, she comes in and, FDR is like, hey, I want you to be my Secretary of Labor. And she, at that point, would have had the privilege of being the first female, cabinet member, right?
Yeah.
And FDR was like, would you like to join? And she was like, 40-hour work week? And he was like, that'll never happen. And she was like, cool, well, you know what else will never happen? I'll never be on your cabinet then.
Yeah,
He's
sure.
like, okay, we'll try. And she's like, all right, cool. And then she does it, right?
Right.
So like what you have before World War II is like a moment of crisis that allows people to start to rethink like what the actual economy should do. And what, this radical position in 1905 now becomes something people want to accept. Fast Social Security, minimum wage, all these things, right? The end child labor. It's not until like 38 that child labor's ended, right? If you look back at census data, by the way, I was looking at this the other day to try to figure out what sectors people were employed in.
Yeah.
I pulled a census report from 1940.
Yeah.
And so 1940, they were looking back 30, 20, 10, right? All the decades back to 1870. And if you look back then, when they talk about employment categories, they say employment in this category ages 10 and up.
Oh, yeah.
Because kids just fucking worked
in coal mines and shit.
Yeah, it was just 10 years old. So, that doesn't even change in 1938. So you have a crisis that allows people to start really rethink it, right? Let's rethink things. And then FDR slips this thing in during World War II called the GI Bill, which is going to radically transform the country.
Yeah.
So it's the wealth. You're right in the sense that like, Tokyo is destroyed, London's destroyed, right? Paris is bombed out, like Berlin, like Moscow never got taken, but the Soviets broke down all their industry, put it on railroads, and took it out to Kazakhstan or like Uzbekistan and like Central Asia and Siberia. Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, like it's not there. Every industrial city in the world basically gets destroyed. Rome's bombed. Like the only show in town, like you said, is the U.S., which by conservative standards has 50% of the world's industrial capacity after the war.
Yeah.
By some standards, more than that.
Probably more. Yeah.
But so that's where the wealth comes from. And you're right. It's a one-time thing. It's exogenous. It's not a part of the system, right?
It's an aberration in the system.
It is. There's the only other time that we know of that probably there was a similar social leveling was after the Black Plague.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Which would have been the East, right?
Well, it would have been in Europe because it kills like 25 to like up some places up to 50% of the population.
A third of the population, and then in some places 75.
And so like anybody who had anything, even if they're poor, they're all inheriting all the wealth of like 18 different relatives.
Right. Everyone in Istanbul is dead, and it's like, oh, plunder.
Yeah. So something like smaller number of people, live, they get stuff. There's more land for peasants, right? And then that ends around the 15th century, and they rise up because there's riots all across Europe because life gets so bad so fast once the population catches up.
Yeah.
And they're all like, the only thing you ever told us was about like Christianity, and you're like the meek shall inherit the earth, and you like we're the meekest, like we're real meek, and you guys live in castles. And so there are riots all over. There's a great book called Peasant Fires about it, where they're just like, well, you guys taught us this, and the only way we can take it is it's your fault. This shit's getting bad.
Yeah.
And then they rise up, and the peasants just get slaughtered because there's like knights, like not knights,
exactly,
but like people with armor, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so post World War II era in the United States is like that as well. But it doesn't. The wealth boom is there, but the reason it gets to people is not random, right? We had massive wealth booms in the 1870s, 1880s, right? With the Second Industrial Revolution. It doesn't make people's lives better in the same way. The reason it makes people's lives better is because we did something before that happened called the New Deal, which instilled workers' rights and the right to organize, and so those institutions actually allow that wealth to benefit people.
Well, the only thing I would say with that whole thing is that a lot of those advancements could be read as basically capital making appeasements to those people to stop what happened in Russia. Like they saw that like, oh, this is like, and whatever happened later in Russia, it's still this like, this big groundswell of support of people being like, hey, we don't want you to have all the money anymore. And it was like, oh God. And so they're kind of stuck with their pants down, which is sort of what I was saying, like, with those reforms of like Truman integrating the army and stuff like that, not even because of any like, great, noble reason, but because it was like, oh, we're going to have to fight these people forever. And we need everybody on board kind of thing.
But this is going back to what I was saying earlier, not just because of that. But because once the U.S. and the Soviet Union are both trying to integrate, they're trying to get allies in the decolonized world. to go back to what I was saying, the United States is like, look, the Soviets are bad. Like, our economy is the best economy in the world, right? Don't you want to be like us? And so that's their case, right?
Yeah.
And like, Soviets are terrible people. And the Soviets show up and they're like, look, yes, it's true America is a better system right now. It's very wealthy. But you should think maybe, when was American Revolution? Was 1770s. Okay, good. So, you will adopt that system in 160, 170 years. Good luck. You'll have a great system. You should write letters to third great-granddaughter and say, I worked very hard for you. That will be one option. Other option might be to consider us. We are superpower. We are, as you know, growing faster than the United States, but also, when was our revolution? Was 1917. What year is it now? 1952. Okay. So you could have American system, write to third granddaughter, tell her you're welcome, or you could tell her. Because our system will transform you in very little time. Oh, by the way, we understand that Americans will tell you how bad we are to our own people. You, representative from Ghana, you should go visit the United States. Go to Washington, D.C. And while you're there, you should see countryside in Virginia. And while you're there, enjoy dinner in a restaurant.
Right.
And basically...
Oh, that was always Castro's thing.
Yeah.
Castro would roll up into Harlem and stuff and be like, hey, how free are you up here?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the Soviet Union, like, dude, Little Rock, man, all the horrible things that we learned about, right?
Yeah.
Through television. The Soviet Union was blasting that stuff around the world. Mm-hmm. And like in 54, when Brown versus the Board of Education passed, the Eisenhower administration sent a secret memo to the court, which is like, that doesn't happen, right?
Right.
It's usually like court. And we're like, told the justices, before you make the decision, you should consider the impact that your decision will have on our position in the world.
Yeah.
It's not benevolence, right? Like this is going back to what you're saying, right?
Right.
But if there's nobody out in the street fighting about it, there's nobody pushing for it, there's no people out there on the side of justice, there's nothing to report.
Yeah.
I mean, the Freedom Riders literally got on buses and rode through the South, white and black students, and were like, well, we know it will draw attention when they beat us and they blow up our buses and we die. I mean, they're risking their lives for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that makes the news, but that doesn't happen if people aren't there fighting, right?
Right.
So you got to, if those guys had been like, won't change no matter what, they wouldn't have got on those buses. So I know it's easy to be cynical, and there's a lot to be cynical about, and there's a lot of problems. But I would say when you look at the big picture, there's lots to be hopeful for, man.
Is there?
You're looking at me right now like, who are you?
I'm not.
I'm dying slowly of cancer from the smoke in the air.
Oh no. I'm fascinated by this stuff because I do watch it with that. Because I'm just kind of like at this point cynical of everybody. So I'm just like I think everybody's kind of full of shit, but there's no one more full of shit in my opinion. A lot of this comes from we do a sister podcast to this one called What Did You Learn with our mutual friend Monica Scott and Luke Jensen. Awesome. And we have just been watching a lot of these documentaries about fucking hucksters in Silicon Valley, and specifically the two that we've watched most recently were the one about the Fire Festival and the one about Theranos, the Elizabeth Holmes story, where she invented a box of magic that she said could do a 250 tests on one drop of blood, and the whole thing was fake. And she managed to get as like investors Bill Clinton and Henry Kissinger and just all of these like venture capitalist shitheads who basically bought this narrative of this complete huckster, and This was what kind of became the thing of the podcast. I could not bring myself to feel bad for a single person in that thing, except for the people who got their blood test done at Walgreens and it came back like that they had herpes or whatever, and they're like, wait, what? And then they found out it was fake. Those are the people I felt bad for. But it was like she ripped off Henry Kissinger, Bill Clinton, like all of just these ghouls, like these people that are just fucking terrible.
So you're saying there's justice in the world, Rivers?
Yeah, well, there's the only justice in the world is people like fucking Jesse James and people who are just in it for themselves and fuck everyone else. Those are the people who are the closest thing to right, I think. Al Capone, that's I don't know. I feel like that is the. But yeah, when I was watching, I was like, why? And the same thing with the Fire Festival thing. I was like, fuck all these people. Good. I'm glad Ja Rule and Billy fucking McFarlane stole your money. You deserve to be sad. You know, as they say in the Bible, you've fattened yourself for the day of the slaughter.
Quoting scripture.
Yeah, that's the Epistle of James. That's my favorite. We were talking Paul with the cashier person up front here at the Smokers Abbey, and that's my favorite epistle because it's just James being like, "Hey, you all you rich people, go fuck yourselves. It's over. You don't get shit when you die."
It's hard, man, but it's all. I mean, like if you put it all together, like Fire Festival, and then the other, what was the company called? The Theranos, and you look at like Bernie Madoff, man.
Right. Well, Madoff like fucked a bunch of real people and it was a charity. That's like that sucks. That's terrible. But if you're just stealing from Silicon Valley, more power to you.
The lesson is number one, and this is why I like Galbraith, the book I was mentioning earlier, The Great Crash.
Yeah.
It was like written in the 50s, I think. Like Galbraith is so brilliant, man. It's such a clever and well written book because he like talks about what happened in the 1920s, and he's just like, look, there's some lessons you can learn from this. Like, one is, it's easy to find the scammers and the Ponzi schemes. You know, for those of you who don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, it's like, I tell Rivers I can get him a 10% return, so Rivers gives me $1,000, and I tell Rivers, hey, I got it for you. And then Rivers goes, wow, nobody else can give me a 10% return, so I'll keep that money with you. And every month I send, for a year, at the end of the year, I send Rivers a piece of paper that says, you've got $1,100 now. And he's like, well, okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to take that money out. So next year I tell him, And then
it's like Amway or
Rivers
Scientology.
Tells somebody else, and then, the next person gives me $2,000. The next person gives me $10,000, right?
Right.
But nobody will withdraw that money because I'm telling them they're getting such insane returns. And if any one person does, when I've got, millions and billions of dollars, whatever, I can pay off any individual one person, but I'm not actually investing the money. I'm spending that money. I've got it myself, right? I'm just sending people reports that says I'm getting this returns, and people keep on giving me more money. And it all falls apart when everyone wants the money back at the same time because there's a run, because things get bad, right?
Yeah.
So, Galbraith, that's why I was saying, reading that book in the end of 2008 when Bernie Madoff was falling down, it was like Galbraith was just in this thing talking about all the scams that went down in the Great Depression. And he was like, look, don't wait till things fall apart to look. You'll find them. It's easy to find them when things fall apart.
Well, yeah.
You should be looking when things are good. And he said the thing you should watch out for is when people start to think that they just get to be rich. Right? I just get to be rich.
Well, that's like what the damn Theranos lady, she is the heiress of Fleischmann's yeast. That's where her money came from, and that's what I said in the episode, is that they always use this phrase that pisses me off where they'll say, oh, they have a business pedigree. It's like, just because your dad was good at something, and this is what I said in the episode, and I'm going to repeat it, but I don't care because I was like, oh, that was a cogent point that just fell out of my ass. My dad studied physics and chemistry and taught this shit for 30 years. I don't know what chemistry is. And just because your dad's good at something, like Anderson Cooper's family is the Vanderbilts. I wouldn't trust the motherfucker to build a railroad. There's no such thing as a business pedigree. So to what you're saying, like, just the fact that, like, there's that mindset of like, oh, well, my father's rich, so I should be rich. It's we should... take all of that.
Don't we live in a country that was founded on a rejection of hereditary monarchy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
We sure did. Yeah. No, it was, but that was. I mean, and again, that's more cynicism. But I'm like, that was the con in the first place, was telling people that shit. It was like, no, we want to separate ourselves from the existing monarchy to set up our own. In the form of an oligarchy, which is what we've more or less had from the beginning.
Yeah, but then wow, rock and roll.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Okay, maybe, but let me say that. We did separate ourselves from it, but then they fucked up and they put that line in about how all people are created equal, and then people have kept on holding them to that, Yeah,
but they're only giving them so much so they don't burn everything down, it seems
But that's fair, but that's a moving target.
Yeah.
It's like, at what point will we burn everything down? We've gotten closer and closer to, the world we want to live in, right?
Halfway.
Don't you... Look, man. Yeah, yes.
See, I think it's like they give you the iPhone, they give you air travel, they give you modern conveniences to keep people quiet. It's like they give you just enough to keep you complacent or whatever.
But just enough to keep us complacent right now is an understanding that slavery is wrong and that racism is wrong, and I know you're going to be like, but what about the white House? They're idiots, and there are people that are convinced that what they're doing isn't racist. But here's the thing. If you said to anyone, even people that do things that are racist, if you said to them, you're a racist, that to almost any American with very slim is a slander, right?
Yeah, sure.
50 years ago, you could have asked, you're the home of George Wallace there, and in Alabama.
Course. Yeah.
You've been like, you're a racist, and they've been like, that's right, I am. They would have been like, of course I am, right?
Yeah,
and now,
sure.
Just think about the difference between being proud to be a racist and now knowing you shouldn't be, even if you're doing things right. And one of the problems is we so well understand as a society that it's not cool to be racist, that people this is the problem with the debate, right, amongst white folks, right?
Yeah.
You tell them, I'll tell the white guy, or especially with black person, they get really upset about that. But it's well, what you're doing is racist. I'm not a racist, right?
Yeah.
Think about that. The simple fact that they care. I'm not, right? That's progress. Now, the issue is that they think they're not, so you should probably go about it in a more gracious way to be able to demonstrate to them. Maybe don't call them a racist, but understand they don't want to be a racist. So instead of saying, you're the thing that sounds like asshole when I say it, point out that maybe what you're doing would... By doing that, you might associate yourself with this thing you don't want to be. I think that's a better way to go about it.
Yeah.
But think about that, man. I mean, dude, your state voted for George Wallace in '68, man.
Yeah, and again for from basically 1968 until 82, over and over, and then at the end he flipped his position, and as we know, because of the Drive-By Truckers song, he won with the biggest percentage of the black vote of any governor before. So. Yeah, his last term in office, he got him back. But no, what you're saying though is I get you don't
There's
necessarily.
Huge progress in that.
Well, no, but
that we know we shouldn't be, right? Even if people still are, and they are,
well,
right?
But
we do things, and there's still built-in repression, and we're still living with the legacy of institutionalized discrimination. The fact that we know that's not cool, even if we don't want to accept that we still might do it,
right?
That in itself is progress, and we're not done. We're not done. Anybody think we realized it was wrong, we did it. No. It still needs to be fought, but that in itself is progress.
See, I just think they moved the goal. That's all it is. So if somebody is like, "Oh, I'm not racist," but what they're thinking is I am not, actively screaming racial slurs at people and waving a Confederate flag. But what they are doing is living in gated communities and voting for school boards and rezoning things so they don't have to be around. They're just basically separating themselves. But you can't tell, to actually sit down and explain to those people that it's okay, this activity is fucked up that you're engaging in. They're going to be like, nah, it's not. And they're able to walk it all, to just completely write it off. And I don't think those people can be negotiated with. I think that their influence can only be minimized and defeated, and the only way to do that is to appeal to because this is the thing is that kills me is the argument, and they always say this shit where they're like, well, half the country feels this way. They don't. Half of the electorate feels this way. 40% of people do not vote. And the argument has always been especially from mainstream Democrats, is oh, how do we get these Trump people back? I'm fucking, there is the biggest pool of people that don't give a shit. Why don't you talk to them for a second,
Yeah.
And the reason they don't is because they are economically invested. Both parties are economically invested in what happens and appealing to the people who don't vote. I mean, shit. 80% of people that make under $20,000 a year do not vote. And a lot of that is due to, zoning and, taking away people's rights through the prison system and all that stuff. Right. There's a lot of that, but that ain't a majority. Most of those people who just don't have the time, don't give a shit. 50% of all Congress people are millionaires. So it's why would I get who is this person? What do they know about my experience? And so what you have to do is talk to those people, and it drives me up the fucking wall because the whole argument is how do we win back the Trump people? I'm it's at best 30% of the eligible voting population, and you could just ignore them and talk to the rest of the people, and it would be moot.
But I would even say that with the Trump people thing, right? So full disclosure, the guy I'm all in on in this election, I've never been is Andrew Yang.
Right? Yeah.
And I got a sticker on my truck.
I saw that.
Never had a sticker on my truck for any politician.
Sure.
But here's the thing: Yang is pulling in Trump voters, and he's running for the Democratic ticket. And what I love about this is it actually, I think, highlights what I've been trying to say to people. yes, Trump appealed to racism. Trump's a fucking monster.
Yeah.
Right? But you got to ask yourself, like, is everybody that voted for him a monster? Or in 2016, were they faced with a decision between one candidate, Hillary Clinton, who was like, everything's fine.
Yeah, America's already great.
It's great. It's fine.
That's all you need to hear.
Never seen a candidate in my life who was just like, I used to joke, Rivers. I used to be like, in my classes, because I don't mention politics, right?
Yeah, sure.
My goal is to get them to think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And to get them to think, I have to break down everything that's like not religiously sacred, but like politically sacred to them, right? And I used to joke in my classes, I'm like, all right, now I'm going to tell you who I'm voting for in the next election. I'm voting for the one that wants to change America.
Yeah.
And the joke was, it was a dumb joke.
Right, right. Because everybody says
everybody's going to do it. And then Hillary Clinton ran, and I was like, what?
I wouldn't do a goddamn thing.
Yeah. She's like, everything's fine, I did a little bit.
Oh,
did you hear real wages were up by 0.1% last year? So,
I dabbed on Ellen, and your boss is going to steal money out of your pocket and abuse you as a laborer, and I love it.
Yeah.
It's great.
So like, how about instead of looking at it, and like, it's fair to look at it as one person that signaled to white nationalists, because that's true, right?
Yeah.
We know that. Like, he brought back in people that hadn't voted in forever because they thought their man was gone when George Wallace flipped, right? So there's that. But the other side is, imagine this. Like, think about it, pull everything back and go, you know that something is wrong. Like, we all know that something's up, right?
Yes.
And you look at it as, there's one candidate who's like, nuh-uh, nothing's wrong. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And another candidate who's like, everything's on fire.
Right, yeah.
And you're like, well, God, like, look, that one seems crazy. But the other one's like telling me something I know's not right. So maybe everything is on fire? Like, the only one who's willing to acknowledge that something's wrong is like everything's on fire, right? And consider that maybe the problem is, and this goes back, Rivers, man, I don't want to talk too long about this. Like, I've been droning on, but
no,
it goes back to like,
this is awesome.
I'm convinced that we think we are who the country was in the 1950s, right?
When we tripped over a golden bucket and slipped in shit.
Right. We walked right into like the greatest thing, right?
Yeah.
And the other side of it, like the whole like God gave this to us, dude. That's also part of the Cold War, because the U.S. and the Soviets were both going like, well, what does it mean to be who we are? And they're like, well, we're the opposite of the other one.
Yeah.
Right. So the Soviets were like, we're atheists, even though like the Orthodox Church was operating there, so we're atheists.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Like, well, we're
gonna add
the most religious ever, right?
Yeah,
Like, the most Christian. That's
we're going to add one nation under God to the
54,
thing.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
54, we add that in there, and we start talking about, well, they say there's no God, so we're convinced that everything's God, and so God has done this for us, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, we internalized all that, right? So what we did in the Cold War was we told the whole world that we were special, but we believed it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, we're still convinced. We talked ourselves into, this is just magic. And so what we learned from that was, and I think this is why the baby boomers are the fucking worst, right?
Right.
Is that they were like, from day one, like, they're born and they're just like, you're special. Like, they're like, I can't believe these kids think they're snowflakes. It's like, motherfucker, you're the one who thinks that we're all snowflakes. This country's a snowflake, right?
Yeah.
But we're not. Like, it's a historical condition. But it all started becoming obvious by the 1970s.
Right.
I mean, things just started like, well, countries were rebuilding, and we didn't produce as much oil anymore, and the world was getting back to the way it was. And then there was this guy named Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter, who, is like, no one pays attention to him. They're like, Carter. The thing about Carter and why I think his presidency is so dead on, and why it's like a moment, like, there's this speech that he gives, like the Malay
speech. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, he is like laughed at after this.
And he's right.
Yeah. He's like, hey,
right.
Look, we can't have everything forever. Like, at some point, we will run out of things because you just can't have everything forever.
Right.
when Carter told us this, looking back on it, man, like we should be like, wow, that guy, he told us, right?
Yeah,
but here's
that we were having a party and the party's over.
Yeah, or not the party's over. It's like look, you can still be drunk. You just gotta drink less, a little bit less, right?
Right.
I mean, he didn't say like you can't live good lives. He just said maybe we should use a little less, and he was crucified for it.
Oh yeah.
And having run against Reagan, that's just they made a mockery out of him, right?
Right.
Because Carter was like, I'm pretty sure that like this can't be infinite. And Reagan was like, I got a credit card with your fucking kids' names on it, like your grandkids' names on it. Who wants to get drunk, right?
Yeah.
But I think that what Carter was saying was, look, like your dad's dead. He ain't coming back. His income's gone. We need to move forward, right? But the thing about mourning is, it's a process. And
You mean mourning in America, right?
yeah, mourning, but this is like mourning, like
with
sadness,
the
right?
U there. Yeah.
People go through stages, and you can tell them someone's dead, right? But people they don't just go, oh, okay, we'll adjust, right? So Carter told him this, right? And he was like, and now so here's the deal: your dad's dead, and you need to accept it. The problem was, it didn't work. And if you think about the stages of mourning, right? The Democrats after that, they locked in. They were like, yo, you can't. It's the politics of denial, right? That's the first stage. You can't cope with it, right? And then Reagan showed up, and the Republicans since then, they've embraced the politics of anger, which is the third stage of mourning, right?
Yeah.
And because mourning is a more advanced stage, and people were like, okay, he's dead, right? Or anger is, right?
Right.
That means you've accepted that someone's dead, and you're now freaking out, right? But the Democrats are in denial. And gradually over the years, people have been like, nah, like he died. Like it's dead, right?
Yeah.
But we're not going to accept it yet. So the Democrats are like, no, it didn't happen. And no one believes that anymore.
Yeah.
The Republicans are mad, and we're like, okay, we'll break some shit, right? And what we need is someone who's willing to now, like 40-some years later, we need someone to be like, okay, look, we need to accept it. Stop being mad, stop denying it, right? Let's accept it and live in the new reality. And so far, no politician has done that really well. Like, no, if we just do this, he can come back. Like, it's like, no, we can't, right? Nothing
Right.
you do. So let's accept the new terms and realize life is still good. Life can still be good. You just can't have the one thing back. And that's why Yang is the first politician I've heard who's like, accept it. You're not getting your fucking steel jobs back. You're not getting all these things back. Look, but it's still good. Let's just figure out ways that, like, in the world without dad, we can have a good life without denying he's there, being mad. Like, look, we're past that. Let's ask ourselves what's life like after dad, because living is good memory, right? Like, let's just make life as good as possible. And in fact, maybe it's better. Maybe dad was kind of an asshole, right? Maybe dad was a little bit of a racist. He didn't let black people work places, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's why I like Yang, because he's the first politician who has the politics of acceptance and moving on.
Yeah, my concern with him is that he's a venture capitalist guy from Silicon Valley, and that is the butthole of the world. Bret the Hitman Hart once said that America needs an enema, and I would stick it right in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he got booed for that, and I was like, no, Silicon Valley, that's the worst place. That is the asshole of the world, because his whole thing, I feel like, because his big, policy position is the UBI, which I think is maybe a good idea, but his, weird, like, ulterior motive seems to be divorcing a large part of the population from the economy by doing that. It's like, okay, we're going to give you $1,000, and then operating under the assumption, this is where the Democrats are always led to fucking slaughter, that capital won't adjust for something like that, and then fuck you out of it. You know what I mean?
But like, let's put it like this, right? So let's go back to like the New Deal, right? And the progressive era, even before that.
Yeah.
So, there are, like the Luddites, right? They blow shit up.
Yeah.
There are people who are like, no, we want to go back to countryside. But the reality is, it's really hard to imagine going back without fucking blowing the whole thing up, right?
Yeah.
And then the other reality is that the productive capacity created by that second industrial revolution, like in the 1880s, like after the Civil War on to, the early 20th century, it actually makes people's lives better if you can figure out a way to make it do that. It's just not, right? Because it's not incentivized to do that. And so we live in the world we live now because there was this huge production in productivity and industrial technology. And the world we live in now is overall better. But what you had to do was figure out what's a way we can make that system actually make people's lives better. And that's what they tried in the progressive era. There's backlash in the 20s, but the 1930s, right? It was like, okay, so we're not going back to farming, most of us. And if we are, it's going to be shitty because we're sharecroppers. But anyway, we're not going back to that. So what was the thing you wanted? Why did you actually like the idea of farming? Was it because at that, like before you could have a good life? Was it because you could have some kind of control over your life, but now you don't have any control over your life because this fucker's working you 80 to 100 hours a week, right?
Right.
What if we created a way that we could get the capacity, but you also get control over your lives, right? 40-hour work week, better pay, support for unionization. So one day you can retire, right? So like in the agricultural communities, it was like you got to a certain age and the kids would take care of you, right? And then you're thrown into the fucking industry and, in 1895. And you're just going to work till you die, and there's no hope for the future where you kind of look back and you have time to reflect on it. So what those basic policies the New Deal do is they go, hey, okay, so you're not getting the world that you think you want back. But what if we could give you the best, like some of the best parts of it, right?
Yeah.
A leisure time, the help to retire, some control over your life. Okay, cool. So they did that, and it works. And you're right. And since then, in the last 90 years, the economy has changed, right? And it got outside of that, and then there's political pressures, the fucking right to work laws. But now we're at a point where it doesn't that those old patterns for giving us those things we actually wanted back, right? They don't work anymore because you got the gig economy, labor, right, is changing, right? So now the goal, I think, always is now and always has been, how do you have a good life? What do we do to make sure this economy provides the things that we actually want? Because we don't actually want to work in steel mills. What we want is a good life. So what if there's a way, under the new terms, to quit thinking about what it was that used to get you the good life? That's gone, right? But what are the new terms will get you the good life? And that's why I think UBI is great. Single-payer health care is great, right? New means of assessing the economy that actually don't say, like with GDP, which was like a way of trying to figure things out during the Great Depression. Even the guy who formulated that was like, this isn't a way to formulate everything. And we're like, you're right, because we got the GDP and we've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average now, and that's everything. It's bullshit. Those aren't gauges of how we live, but we care about those things because it's what we measure. What if there were new ways of measuring things that factored in, livelihood, addiction rates? We'd start caring about those because those would be the things we'd prize ourselves by. And like our bullshit unemployment rate that doesn't count people that aren't looking for jobs. And right now we're looking at the effective, the actual workforce participation rate is like 2/3. Because people are falling out from opioid addiction and everything. But we don't see that anymore because we don't gauge that. That's why I like Yang, man. He's like, let's get the good life like we did before, right? It's not going to be a steel job. But you know what? One day, you're going to be glad it's not a steel job because you don't actually want to be a miner. You don't want to be a fucking steel worker. Those are shitty jobs, right? What you wanted was the result of those. Let's get you that.
But it's only $1,000.
It's a start.
But you know what I mean? Like that, I feel like if that actually ever went through, it would be very similar to all of the New Deal programs where the conservative line would be, we gave you this thing, now shut the fuck up. And then when the thing becomes toxic and no longer works, like Obamacare, for instance, is like a perfect example of like they fucked with it until it became ineffective and it just pissed people off.
Yeah, but Joe Lieberman fucking did that too. So Joe Lieberman was a big problem as well.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of there's but it all came from what I was saying earlier, just this like very dumb wide-eyed optimism that Democrats have that they're operating with that they're the people that they're in conflict with are acting in good faith and they're not. You don't
have to assume they operate in good faith, right? You don't. What you got to do is figure out a way to like make it happen, right? Even if they're not operating in good faith,
right?
So it's like, dude, look back at like the arguments against like the minimum wage,
right?
It's the same bullshit arguments.
You don't have to look back. I'm from Alabama.
Oh, yeah,
it happens literally now. I mean, you live in Tennessee. It happens
like,
now.
The argument is like, dude, if you pay people more, like before minimum wage, like you pay everybody that much, and price everything's going to go up. It's like, did it?
But that's also a perfect example of what I'm saying is like the minimum wage is $7.42, I think, and there are still people, just anybody who's listening to this, go if you can handle the trauma, go to your average local news Facebook page of whatever your NBC affiliate is, and just read the comments anytime there's anything about minimum wages. People just being like, well, flipping burgers isn't a hard job. I'm like, motherfucker, I worked in fast food. I dare you to work one day, in fast food. That job sucks and it's hard and it's depressing, and then you have to wake up and do it again the next day. You know what I mean?
Who cares if it's a hard job?
Yeah.
People obviously want it, right?
Well, they have to. There's no, we've reached this level where everybody's reduced to driving Uber, flipping burgers, competing for bar back jobs and shit like that.
Right.
Because the entire working segment has sort of disappeared to a third world, and that's did you watch the movie Us yet?
No.
So it's a horror film, but the central idea of the horror film is that everybody who your ability to work and exist and live comfortably in the first world comes from hundreds of people having to suffer in the third world, and that's been the big split worldwide now. Is like you've got, in order for us to have iPhones, they have suicide nets outside of factories in Xinjiang and stuff like that. And it's I don't know. Nobody has to reckon with any of that stuff, and it's just getting closer to us every day. Of like, there's going to reach a point where there are no jobs except for the worst thing, and the only people who are interested in like preserving that system are people with something to gain. Like the big lie about the Trump voter is that it's like some hillbilly with no shoes. And there probably is that, but for the most part, those people don't fucking vote. It's guys who own like 10 Papa John's in Idaho. Those are the people who vote for Trump. People with money to spare. That's their most hardcore advocates, is people who live comfortably and are the people who scold, people on the working class and stuff like that. But it's also for their, what little bit of intellectual conservatism that exists. It is advantageous for them to make people think that the Trump voter is some poor shithead living in West Virginia. Yeah. You know what I mean?
But the issue, Rivers, is that like, there's nothing compelling on the other side to pull them away, and that's why I say, like,
well,
if you
fuck
have
them. That's what I say though. It's like, I don't need some guy who owns 10 Papa John's.
No,
in Idaho.
I'm saying, like, so there's a whole group of people that are like, and you're right, a lot of poor people don't vote, right?
Most,
but like, what's in it for them?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. And
so you give people something, right?
Yeah,
Propose something. I mean, it's like, what is the foundation of both political parties, like generally, not every individual, right? But both political parties, like, what's their thing?
Preservation of capital.
It's like, yeah, well, it's like, look at how bad the other one is. Isn't that one shitty? It's like right now, it's like so many, like the biggest Democratic people, right now, the front runners, right? Like, what's their line? Like, Trump is bad. It's like,
they're all doing
you're
that.
Right, Trump is bad. Okay, cool. You're right. Okay, so I agree with you. Okay, Trump really right now can only be president for 6 more years. So, like, what after that? What if your whole thing was Trump was bad and then you get in office? It's like, you didn't have an idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you need to have an idea.
Yeah.
And once you have an idea, then, and this is why I love Yang, right? He's got an idea. And, like, neither one of them are proposing anything that's, like, promising. So let's say Yang gets in office and his policies don't work out the way we want. It's a step forward. So what do we do next, right? Instead of just like, well, we voted for a person who said the other one was bad and we believed him, but now this one's bad, and so where's the other one? Oh, now that one's bad. It's just like back. It's not. You're not running like. If you're voting, if your favorite candidate right now doesn't have policies posted on their website, what the fuck are you voting for?
I don't. That was Hillary's thing though. Just look at my website. I've got ideas. No one does that,
Well, Hillary Clinton also, in her DNC speech, she made mistakes about public speaking that you would have learned doing an open mic comedy for like 3 months. Don't talk over applause breaks. Don't, right? Like,
yeah. It's I don't know. I'm very hesitant to get in with any Silicon Valley anybody, because he's trying to turn the workforce into Netflix, where it's like, oh, okay, if we advance this tremendous amount of money for the UBI and stuff like that, eventually that will solve our problem with this army of poor people that might fuck with what we want to ultimately do, which is to continue to sit at the top on both sides.
But I think what Yang would say to that, because I've heard him say it before, is like, this isn't the solution. It's just it's basically a kickstart, right?
Yeah.
It's a way to like let's instead of
Kickstarter, which also famously fucks people
well,
over.
yeah. But I'm saying like a way to like get things going, right? Like let's instead of talking about trickle down economy, which blows my fucking mind how anyone could believe that. It's like in 1980, okay, like you're desperate, you're out of ideas, you try that.
See, I don't think anybody does believe it. I think the only people are involved in the argument are people who are invested.
Yeah.
There's
But why doesn't anyone believe it now? But like it doesn't work. But like Yang's thing is like, what about a trickle up economy? Which is actually like if you have a larger number of people that have money, I mean, like look back at the economy, right? Like I think the story is on that side of things. But so he's from Silicon Valley, right? So you're skeptical.
Silicon Valley is where they make all the boobs.
Yeah,
Silicon Valley.
Sorry, Silicon Valley. But
Silicon Valley is a Simi Valley out there. Yeah, that's where they make all the porn.
Oh, okay.
Silicon Valley.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I have a bad accent. Silicon Valley, where they con other people out of their money.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey-o.
Bingo.
But like you could also look back at the classic things as like looking at like comparing FDR to Hoover, right? Hoover was a poor kid who worked himself to where he was. Went to people like he went to Stanford. Stanford was nothing when he was there.
I was gonna say yeah.
That dude like made his
Hoover was a
fortune.
geologist.
He was an engineer, right? He's a mining engineer.
Yeah, he studied geology.
Yeah, and like he was a person that had literally. I mean, he earned what he had, and FDR was born with a silver spoon in his mouth.
Right.
I mean, like his family was like had been part of like keeping the opium wars going, and making money.
Yeah.
So like. You could say, what the fuck's this Roosevelt gonna do? This Roosevelt's just one of those guys that made all their money off of keeping people poor. But then the contrast is Hoover is the poor kid who doesn't. And to be fair,
Leland Stanford helped him a little bit.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, you go back and you're like, okay, it's not as clear cut, right?
Right.
But the thing about Hoover was he was a true believer because he under the old ways he had made himself, and he really believed that if you worked hard, you'd do fine. Right? Whereas FDR was able to kind of step back and not be locked in that and be like, okay, maybe I am rich because I got fortunate.
Because I was born on third base.
And so maybe people who aren't don't get this, and maybe we should rethink things, right? So in a way, like what's the Brands book, H.W. Brands, is he the one who wrote Trader to, it's the FDR biography.
Trader to his class or whatever.
Yeah, right? That's what they called FDR.
Yeah.
But he's the guy who implements the policies that are of course, it doesn't fix the Depression, right?
Yeah.
But after World War II, those policies in place are what helped create the middle class. So you gotta say like, I understand skeptical because some people were like, well, Trump's the one who can do it because Trump knows how the business world works. It's like, no, the problem with that is he doesn't fucking know how the business world works, right?
Right.
He actually, I was just talking to Simon Wolin, who's a business and economic historian at University of York. He's a really profound, like a great thinker. Like he was at the conference, and he was like, he just wrote a couple of articles on Trump that haven't come out yet. But like his thing was, no, he's a shitty business person, and you can tell that because he thinks in zero-sum terms, right? Where every good business person understands you collaborate, you create more, right? But Trump's a bad business person because he just thinks if somebody's got something, it's because they took it from somebody. Right? So, like, if I'm going to get something because I took it from somebody and he made all this money by suing people and all this shit, it's like a guy that doesn't actually understand the nature of business, which is you bring people together on something and then there's more because human collaboration and, and coordination is what produces wealth, right? Adam Smith figured that shit out, right? But it's because Trump's such a bad business person that he thinks, well, if we're not doing, China took it from us. Mexico's taking it from us. He's just dumb because he thinks that if somebody got something, they took it from him. But because the argument was, well, Trump can do it because he understands how it works. Yeah, but he doesn't fucking understand how it works. That's a dumb argument for that, right? So, but Yang, understanding the way Silicon Valley works, there's a chance that he might actually understand better how to work things around that gets them on board in a way that can make people's lives better. And I just know anybody else has got a better idea, man.
I'll say this is the last thing I'll say about it is that I think his appeal to you were asking like who does the appeal to besides the obvious like racist nationalists, and it's that sliver of his voting base that was just like everything is bad and this guy is just an agent of chaos.
Yeah.
And I don't like this system. at the very least, this guy will piss off the people who have who I see as kind of whatever, like taking away my place in the world and stuff like that. And it's
the white trash ethos.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's not even a white trash ethos necessarily. It's more just like shitheads, I think, that are just like, you know what, fuck this whole thing. And unfortunately, I guess what I'm saying is he keeps accidentally doing things where I'm just like, like when he keeps making fun of John McCain's dead body, which
They can't get over it, man. He's just like, hey, you slighted me, did me wrong. But that's the white. But like, look, that's why I say it's the white trash ethos. That I know it's not like, I know it's wrong to say that.
Fuck all y'all.
Yeah. I told him.
Yeah.
Like it's that mentality of like you come home and you're like, it's like, so what happened? Why are you home early from work? Because I told that manager what I thought of him. He expected me to blah blah. He's like, well, do you have a job? No. Can you make rent this month? No.
Right.
But in the white trash world, your capital is overflowing in your bank account because you told him, and that's what. And you telling him is just as good as having a. I mean, it's not, but in that world, it's like, wow, you're a badass because you stood up to him.
Right.
But you know what? You fucked everybody over. As my friend Yuri Lauranta, who's a great economic historian at University of Helsinki, was one of my great mentors at Appalachian State before he was there.
Yeah.
He said that type of mentality is like peeing in your pants when it's cold outside.
Yeah.
It'll make you warm for a second.
Yeah.
He's like, but
otherwise, but then there's also the side that would say, but like otherwise you would never be warm at all.
I guess so.
You know what I mean? Like it's like you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, but at the same time it's like there's
never had a face in the first
yeah, kind
place.
of. Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit like coming to terms with this whole thing that the whole system is completely fucked. I'm not going to get anything out of it except to piss off a certain group of people that I hate anyway.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's some people that have correctly assessed that like I'm not going to gain anything from Trump, but it makes you unhappy and I don't like you.
Oh, yeah. That's why that only works if you're convinced there's nothing for you in it. And that's why if someone, such as, say, for example, Andrew Yang, shows up and is like, what if there was something for you in it? Well, you might go, oh, okay, that's better. Like, we could tear it down, and that was fun, but we didn't actually tear it down because this guy doesn't actually want to do it.
Yeah.
He's trying to make himself wealthy. But, and benefit himself in his own fragile ego. What if there was something we had in it so that burning it down might seem less appealing? Also, maybe you learn that he's not actually going to burn it down by this point.
Or, well, I don't know. Maybe. If he gets, if he loses the election and then decides to stay.
I just don't understand why the White House is not a Trump property yet.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Did you hear about Trump's visit to Mount Vernon?
Oh, that was, yeah. He was like, oh, big mistake. He should have named it Washington. Should have named after
nobody
himself.
Knows who he is. President Vernon, was it? Was it President Vernon was our first president?
Right.
People get that confused. They don't? Okay. How about you do something, motherfucker? How about you actually do something and then people remember you?
That's pretty funny, though. That's the worst part, is that Trump is funnier than anybody who hates him, you know?
Yeah, like when he came to Nashville and
it's always accidentally too. Oh, that Nashville speech is incredible.
Oh,
it's 2.5 hours.
Kind of paid attention to like what they said to him at the Hermitage, I guess, and then later on talked about how upset Andrew Jackson was about the Civil War.
Oh yeah. When he died before the Civil War.
Andrew Jackson died in 1845. He was angry about anything in 1861. It was that they had buried him alive 16 years early. You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh man.
All right, Rivers.
Well, shit. This has been a blast. That's the most smoke I've ever intaked in my life just now. I think.
What my words? You're saying?
No. I mean, literally,
I'm blowing smoke up at your ass, Lewis.
No. I mean, literally,
Sorry,
this room
Rivers.
is filled with smoke, and I had what I thought was a small cigar, but turned out to be gigantic. So
more than some of its parts.
Oh man!
Thank you for having me back on this podcast.
Oh,
I hope
that
people will still listen to this podcast because it's usually funny.
Yeah. Well, and when you're
serious.
back in LA, we'll have you on with Pat and the gang again.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
you know, the Road to Now, the podcast that I
was going to say,
Crawford.
Yeah,
one of our most popular episodes of all time, which I'm so happy about, is the episode I did with Pat on stand-up comedy in LA.
Yeah, so I was going to say, definitely check out Dr. Ben's podcast. It's called The Road to Now, and if you need a starter episode, I believe it's episode 99.
Yeah, it's right around there.
With Pat Riley, Dr. Pat. So Dr. Ben and Dr. Pat sitting down for that one. I think you guys were at Pat's house, right?
We were, because Pat's house is awesome. You can check out all my comedy at sawyercomedy.com. I'll be in LA in July. The dates aren't posted yet, but we'll be.
Thanks again for joining us. Where can people find you on the internet?
SawyerComedy.com is my website. You can follow my history side that's more serious, which I think you heard more of, at Ben_Sawyer on Twitter. You can follow my comedy side at Sawyer Comedy on Twitter and Instagram. And you can just Google my name. And, you can come take my class at MTSU.
Yeah. Yeah, come to Tennessee. Come to Murfreesboro.
If you want to come there. Decide.
Come for the sound engineering. Stay for Dr. Ben's history.
And, email me first personally and find out whether or not
find out his office
there.
hours. What are your office hours?
Funny, I should post those for this week, shouldn't I?
But yeah, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Thanks, Ben, for being here. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/thegoodspod. We're on Twitter at thegoodspod. Every episode ever, youtube.com/thegoodspod. Big shout out to our friend Richard Eden up there in the Klondike doing the hard work at thegoodspod.com and the Brain Freeze Podcast Network. Buy a shirt. ProWrestlingTees.com/thegoodspod. Pat, what should the folks do when they get to iTunes?
Do iTunes and rate us. Give us 5 stars. They leave us a review. Leave us a review. That's a lot more than just giving us 5 stars. And doing that shows the attitude of gratitude. Okay, I'm Pat Riley.
And if you don't have the attitude of gratitude, Daddy, fuck you. Oh, man. Another big thanks to our guest, Dr. Ben Sawyer. Always such a fun time hanging out with that guy. Song of the week this week is another track from Jonny Moze. If you missed last week's show, go back and check it out. We had an entire interview with my good friend, Jonny Moze, great musician and author, and just all-around funny guy out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And the episode had peppered in within it a bunch of Jonny Moze's new music. And this is one of the tracks that I left off of that episode that I'm putting on this one now. So, Song of the Week this week, once again, from Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Jonny Moze, and the song is Convenience. And we'll see you next week when we're back at Disgraceland Studios in Hollywood.
For the late night punk rock show, high school dope and Adderall kept us company on the road. Way back home was Mourning, Alabama, and I turned up the radio. We pulled off and made out in a Waffle House parking lot, 'cause it was right convenient. December, south of Birmingham, as I recall, on 2 hits of acid, wondering how the summer never finds its way to fall down here. You said you didn't love me, but always answered when you called. So we stayed up all night in that dormitory mail room, 'cause it was right convenient, but only for the night. You told me I was just convenient, whatever gets you high. Down to Georgia early, late last spring. Nothing in my pocket but a Valium and another unused wedding ring. I saw you standing by the baggage claim, and I thought you never needed anything. So we stayed up all night talking in the long-term parking lot, and it was inconvenient. I gotta catch my flight. I used to say I never cared for her, but really she's alright.
The Goods from the Woods was mixed, edited, and distributed by me, Rivers Langley. You can find the show on Twitter at The Goods Pod. Our theme song was composed by DJ Smiles. Check him out on Twitter at DJ Smiles.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.